Hello, and good morning or evening. It's morning for me. I'm enjoying my cup of coffee to get my day started. I want to make a video right now just synthesizing and finalizing all of my thoughts surrounding Vscript game modes and all these new game modes that are being introduced onto the workshop and eventually finding their way into the game. I want to take a few minutes just to finalize my thoughts about all of these things and gun games specifically for a few minutes. Only as of my most recent stream was I able to really concretely state my problems with Vscript game modes, especially with ones like gun game or prop hunt and what have you. It took a little bit of helping along from other people to really help me realize why game modes like this stick out like a sore thumb, and, in my opinion, do not belong inside of Team Fortress 2. I'll start by just going over gun game. In my opinion, gun game simply does not belong in TF2, just based on bare fundamentals of TF2 gameplay. You have no teams, and you have no mercenaries. That right away is a complete violation of Team Fortress 2. There's no teams, and there's no mercenaries. There was a comment left on one of these maps, and I'm going to paraphrase this very poorly. Gun games should not be in Team Fortress 2 because it is not a Team Fortress 2 game mode. And that may sound like circular reasoning, but the reason for that is every Team Fortress 2 game mode that we have, excluding Vscript game modes, has an objective that is not skill-based. And the way that works is you have a control point, you have a payload cart, you have the flag, the intelligence. These are objectives that players can interact with, but they don't have to directly interact with players in order to feel like they're contributing towards the game. You can move the point forward, you can capture a point, you can move the intel, you can collect dropped souls, or move the jack around if you're playing pastime. The player can interact with all of these things and still feel like they're contributing towards the end goal of the game. And this was done with the specific intention, and one of the main design elements of Team Fortress 2 is that the game was made to be appealing to as many people as possible, with as wide of a range of skill levels as possible. That's also the reason why we have 9 different classes with different abilities and what have you, because Valve wanted to create a game where anyone could play the game with their desired level of engagement. You have the engineer, who has his buildings, where the game effectively plays itself for you. Or you have the spy, which is much more heavily involved and requires a lot more player input. The game was designed to be as appealing to as many people as possible with any level of skill. And gun game completely strips all of this away. Strips away the teams, strips away the mercenaries, completely removes the bare minimum design element, the philosophy of the game mode being appealing to anyone with their desired level of engagement and their desired skill, and their current skill level. So that alone is completely antithetical to Team Fortress 2's design, because gun game, the progression is based entirely on skill and entirely on interacting and being better than your fellow player, and also heavily dependent on what weapon you're using, because it's dependent on how good one weapon is against another, because it is raw weapon v weapon. It is no longer team v team, ability versus ability, where all of the classes and their interactions kind of level each other out, and they all have their own individual space, right? But when you do raw weapon versus weapon, everyone has the same health, everyone has the same movement speed, no other abilities. It completely throws TF2's weapon balancing out of whack. It violates a lot of what weapons were designed to do, to mesh with the abilities of the classes, to make them flow better with the entire experience of the game. And when you strip that structure away from it and make it raw weapon v weapon, entirely skill-based, this is no longer Team Fortress 2. And that's why, at the bare minimum, gun games should not be added. Period. Even something like Versus Saxton Hale. You have the control point that you can eventually capture and win. But other game modes like Zombie Infection or Prop Hunt, those are completely dependent on players interacting with each other in order to win, unless the timer runs out. Those are not TF2 game modes, and it took a little bit of talking with other people to help me realize why game modes like Zombie Infection and Prop Hunt and Gun Game really stick out like a sore thumb and don't mesh with Team Fortress 2 at all beyond their aesthetic. It's still, and that's why you have this level of, people are enamored with these game modes and they're enamored with these things. It still looks like TF2, but it doesn't play like TF2. It is not Team Fortress 2. So it shouldn't be put in the game. And that's my opinion. And branching out into the more general argument with Vscript game modes, this one should also not be added because it's going to suffer the same fate as every other Vscript game mode. Versus Saxton Hale, Zombie Infection. 2 weeks after it's been added, it will no longer receive maintenance. Any kind of balancing adjustments it needs, any kind of fixes it needs, it will be completely abandoned. And the problem with that is that the people who make maps, generally, are not game designers. They don't have the balancing hammered out. You need a lot of playtesting, you need a lot of interactions from as many players as possible to really hammer out the kinks. And 2 weeks of playtime, following only a couple of months of development or what have you, or however few months they make this, is not enough to make a fully fleshed out functioning game mode. These people are not game designers, they're not game developers. They have a lot of interesting ideas and they can make cool stuff, but that doesn't automatically guarantee that it should be included in Team Fortress 2, and it needs that time in the oven with playtesting to ensure that it is as streamlined as possible. But beyond 2 weeks after an update comes out, all of these game modes get completely abandoned. Because what happens? Workshoppers move on to the next game mode, to the next map, so they can crank that out for the next update cycle, and they can get their next paycheck. Because there is no monetary incentive to keep working on maps that have already been added into Team Fortress 2. Now it's time to move on to the next one, in order to get their next paycheck. And this doesn't happen all the time. Every now and again you have someone go back and they tweak an old map and they make a fix here and there, which is great. I think that should happen more often. In fact, it needs to happen more often. But the problem is that it doesn't. Because these guys are just going to move on to their next project to get it squirted out in time for, Scream Fortress and then ultimately Smismas. Which is not good, because that just compounds the problem of a lack of playtesting and a lack of time in the oven. Because like Zombie Infection, which only had less than 3 months of development time. It's a miracle it worked at all, as well as it did, despite all of the bugs on launch and it just breaking for the first few days, right? That's not enough time. Not enough time for a game, let alone a game mode for a pre-established game. And the general problem is that the more Vscript game modes we throw on top of the pile, it's going to keep diluting the game experience, where TF2 is going to become a game where it tries to do a whole bunch of things poorly, rather than what it was designed to do really well. And that's very important to maintain, because if you keep throwing in more game modes, it's going to sour and dilute the experience, rather than reinforcing what it's already good at. And so all mappers need to do is just make really good Team Fortress 2 maps, and you're going to make people very happy. Because people come to TF2 to play TF2. It is a good game. All you need to do is lean into that. You lean into that and make good TF2 maps, people are going to applaud you. Whereas with these game modes, sure, people are going to enjoy the novelty of them for about 20 minutes before they fuck off and go back to the normal game. And so if you keep throwing more of these onto the pile, they're just going to rot in that pile. And then, of course, the only counter-argument that I see against new game modes being added is the one that I see everywhere. It's like, oh, if it's fun, what does it matter to you? If it's fun, you just hate fun. Clearly, you don't want new content for TF2. You want the game to die. All of these normal, ridiculous arguments. Just because something outside of the context of TF2 is fun doesn't mean that it should be added to the game. Go-karts are fun. Hide and seek is fun. Does that mean they belong in Team Fortress 2? No, not at all, because those are not the same game. If you really want to play Prop Hunt, go to the other places where Prop Hunt is handled much better. If you want to play Gun Game, just go play Open Fortress. It handles it way better than this Vscript game mode and is a much more pleasurable experience. Instead of it being this, frankly, a little bit janky and clunky game mode, where it had to be shoehorned into an existing game and forced to function as this weird bastardization of a game that already functions perfectly well inside of its own sphere. Just go play there. Don't demand it be added to Team Fortress 2. And this is something we're seeing with a lot of games like Fortnite especially. People are surprisingly complaining about Fortnite now. I never thought I would see the day, but they're adding too much into Fortnite. Too many game modes, too much stuff, to where the original experience has become so diluted it's beginning to sour the experience for people who genuinely enjoy the game. Same for Call of Duty as well. Call of Duty is just unrecognizable now with all the stuff they've been adding. Not just in terms of the aesthetic and the cosmetics, but the gameplay experiences as well. My God. And I really don't want Team Fortress 2 to suffer the same fate. It's already been going down that path for many years now, at least in the aesthetic and cosmetics department. But I don't think you can treat the gameplay like a hat. You cannot treat the maps, the gameplay experiences, like a cosmetic. They need a lot of curation, they need a lot of time, and they need to match the established gameplay that Team Fortress 2 was designed to have. And if you don't meet the bare minimum requirements of the mercenaries, the teams, having an objective that is not based on interacting with other players, you have not made a good game mode. You have not made a good map. It is not appropriate for Team Fortress 2. So, I say, no thanks, not interested, to gun game. And I think everyone else should as well. If you want to enjoy these things inside of community servers, that's fine. Go play them there. If you want to enjoy all these alternative game modes in community servers, that's what they've always served the purpose for. That's what community servers are there for, to enjoy custom content like this. They should not be official additions into the game. One more point that I just remembered as I ended my recording. There is this phenomenon that I see when it comes to maps inside of Team Fortress 2. You know, I see good God. So if I go to say, this is most popular? What is this, dude? Who? The workshop really is a treat sometimes, right? It truly is a sight to behold. So if I go to this map Embargo, right, that was part of the Tropic Thunder, Tropic Crisis content pack project, community update, whatever you want to call it, right? If I go to this map and I look at all of the ratings, there's over 1,600 of them, overwhelmingly positive. And typically on the workshop, it's very hard to make what looks like a functional map and then get it below anything of a 5-star rating. Because people have to go out of their way to vote on maps on the workshop. Because let's say you have someone just thumbing through items, maps are not shown to you. You have to go into the separate map tab and then vote on it that way. So most of the exposure that TF2 maps have comes from external drivers, typically Reddit or Twitter or YouTube. There's been a lot of discourse surrounding the Tropic Thunder, Tropic Crisis, content pack, community project, update, whatever you want to call it. And this is simply reinforcing a problem that I see when it comes to a lot of the discourse surrounding potential content for TF2, where a lot of the positive ratings and a lot of the drive to have this content added comes from people that don't actually play the game. It largely comes from the vocal spheres, which, as my most recent video shows, comes from people that don't actually play TF2. We have a lot of people that love talking about the game, but, as I showed, not that many people play it. And this is especially true when it comes to TF2 maps. It happens for cosmetics as well. For example, I showed that cat head on a video of mine some months ago, where it got insanely popular on Twitter. Also, that femboy shirt for Scout, you can go find that. Of course, it's going to blow up on somewhere like Twitter, but all of the positive discourse surrounding that does not come from people that regularly engage with the game. And this problem is heavily amplified for maps, because when it comes to a cosmetic, or when it comes to a war paint, or what have you, typically what you see in the workshop promos, that is normally what you see is what you get. And you have a lot of people who tend to doctor their promos. They do them in Blender, or they take them over into Photoshop, and they do a paint over. So it does tend to be misleading between what they show and then what the actual product is in-game. That does happen. You can look at it yourself. I'm not going to show examples. But it's a bigger problem with maps, because these are the gameplay experiences. This is the actual gameplay. And so all a mapper needs to do is, I'm not saying they're doing this maliciously, but all they need to do is take a few flattering angles of their map, make it look good, and the vast majority of people who interact with maps on the workshop are simply going to vote on it based on aesthetics and not on gameplay. I strongly doubt that, using Embargo as an example, this is a non-unique example, that I strongly doubt that all 1,637 people who rated this map and who voted on this map, strongly doubt all of them actually played on it. Took the time to subscribe, get it downloaded, and play on it themselves inside of a full server, which you can do, by the way, right now. If you go to the Tropic Crisis update page, they actually have game servers running right now where you can test these maps and then, appropriately vote for them afterwards. But this is a problem, and this is why we tend to get garbage maps into the game, because you have a lot of upvotes being driven by external discourse coming from people that don't play the game, that bump them up in popularity, and then Eric Smith sees them and then simply adds them afterwards without taking the gameplay into regard, or without taking the gameplay into consideration. And that is a huge, huge problem. And we're seeing that with Gun Game as well. Whereas on the vocal spheres, you go to Twitter, you go to Reddit, people are of course singing the praises of Gun Game because, oh yeah, Gun Game is fun, like go-karts are fun, or like Prop Hunt is fun, but they're fun for different reasons. They're fun because they're not TF2, they are different games. And again, just because something is fun doesn't mean that it's automatically acceptable into Team Fortress 2. And also, just because a map looks good, just because a map looks like it's been well made, doesn't mean that it plays well. And that needs to be ascertained and determined by actually playing these maps yourself and then voting on them appropriately. And I really do encourage people to do that, lest we end up getting maps that play like dick, like this one does, even though it looks really good, into the game. I think that sums up my thoughts on Vscript pretty well. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. Of course, I'm always going to get the people who will just blanket statements and just reduce my thoughts, or they have the reductive argument and they generalize what I say into like, oh, you just hate fun, you just hate good content. Or you hate new content, rather. No, I want good content. I want high quality, good, curated TF2 content for Team Fortress 2. And that's why I keep being vocal about it. I don't want garbage for the game, and that's why I started talking about all this a couple years ago. Like 3 years ago now at this stage, so... Even though the game's unplayable because of bots, we at least want to get good toys. So yeah, that's it.